What's up, guys? This is Theo here coming to you live with another coding tutorial. In this video, I'm going to explain to you the software development or web development lifecycle of a basic web application and what exactly is going on. So we always hear, I'm going to write some key terms. We always hear, let me just save this as an HTML, lifecycle.html. So right, we always hear about, these different words like, you know, server, client, API, HTTP request, response, data layer, or persistence layer, um, software development life cycle. What does this actually mean? So let's break it down. One, the very first thing is we're gonna create a product that the client wants. So say we're creating a store. So product client wants is a e-commerce store. So me as a developer, I'm going to go in and I'm going to get this request and I'm going to build out. Hopefully, if you're on a bigger team, you have it's called a deck or a wireframe. So I'm going to build or receive a deck of the implementation um, requirements and what we need to build. So that's going to happen. Number three, I'm going to start to implement small features, so maybe a shopping cart, the UI, the user interface, um, then eventually the back end, so the database, the connection strings, wiring up my API endpoints. This is just places that are going to hold my JSON from the database so that I can call into it using an HTTP request, so it's always up there at the endpoint, so it's easily configured. So once I have all of that put together, you might ask yourself, well, okay, I have it all built, but how does it work? So basically, what happens? Say we're thinking about something like the mean stack. It's a good example where we have Mongo as our data layer, or rather, Mongo is a ORM. It's an object relational mapper. It allows us to model our data and sort of massage it, and it's just a wrapper around. Or sorry, Mongoose is a wrapper around Mongo, and allows us to easily interact more with our data. Um, so that's all it is. It's similar to using something like Entity Framework with ASP.NET MVC instead of trying to interact directly with your data connections, which can be harder if you're not well versed on that. Similarly, how you would use something like um, JSON or get JSON with jQuery or HTTP service or the provider with Angular. It just sort of abstracts the complexity of interacting with that service. So yeah, we'll use the mean stack, and so we have Mongo for that, and we have Angular, which Angular is just a front end framework, and what this allows us to do is create very rich and easy to interact with front end UIs. So just our interface, and with Angular's built-in directives, services, providers and factories, especially with Angular 2, but there's a lot in Angular 1. It really, again, it abstracts a lot of the difficulty away from the developer. And I think we're going to see this more and more as, as the years go by. And it's happening now. I mean, when I learned to code literally about a year ago to this day, maybe a year and a week, um, I feel like I even stepped into it at a time where um, you didn't really need to know, and I still feel like there's holes in my knowledge, but it's like learning Angular. When you have that HTTP wrapper, you don't really need to know that much about how it's actually working, the asynchronous or asynchronous nature of it, and how you would interact sort of with a vanilla non-wrapper version of making HTTP request in response to your server. Um, So I think the reason for this is like, I think especially with front end, even like 10 years ago, there just wasn't as high of an expectation of what you should be able to do with your UI. But now, especially with stuff like Angular, it makes it really really fast to get your data, to access those API endpoints using Angular, and then take your data with this MVC architecture, use your model, and make sure you're getting the right data in your controller, and then just loop over it in your view and stamp out an item for each of those collections using something like ng-repeat with AngularJS. So I feel like there's becoming less and less of an excuse for not building applications faster, and I think this is only going to continue to go up in expectation. So that's what Angular is used for. Then we have the E in the mean stack, which is Express.js. This is basically just a backend web framework that allows us to create a wrapper for Node.js, and the benefits of it is more middleware configuration. So sort of doing more of an error-driven development, or test-driven development, in that we can configure what's happening at different lifecycle hooks when a certain piece of our application is created, what happens with routing, etc. So just sort of being able to get a greater degree of customization, and I think this is pretty important. But more than that, using something like Node.js or Express.js, you can build a web server or your own local web server in about 10 lines of code. And knowing that is pretty sweet, because there's a lot of things, if you're making HTTP requests, you need a server, obviously. So knowing that you can get your server up and running makes it that much easier to start testing the functionality of your application and knowing that it's working. So yeah, that sort of takes away the intimidation factor. And yeah, the Node.js is in the mean stack. That's just the N. But really, most of the time you're using Express, unless you just don't want to, and in that case, it wouldn't be the full mean stack. So let's look at exactly how this works, right? So I have an application. I have my e-commerce store. I got e-commerce store up and running. I have the whole thing built out, and then what will happen is we'll have, let's just say we have some mock data in Mongo, and then what we're going to do is, using Express, we're going to fetch this data, then we're going to represent it as JSON at a specific API endpoint. Once we have that configured, so say we have like /users, using a RESTful architecture, which just is basically intuitive. So say, and uses, the post, get, put, and delete verbs. If I make a request to /users, a HTTP post request, I should expect to get a JSON array of objects of users. So that makes sense. So we're going to fetch this data, represent it as JSON, and then using AngularJS, most likely with the use of a factory or service through a controller call, just to follow the architectural patterns. What's going to happen is we're going to make a HTTP request. We're going to make a HTTP .get to /users, and since we don't always know what we're going to get back, we're going to have to do a .then function, which is then going to, this is a promise. So then we're going to say when this promise is resolved, then it's up to us to massage the data and deal with it. later on in our application. So that's how Angular comes in. And so now we've looked at how all the pieces of the stack work together. We looked at the API, the server, which is really just there to again as like a host. It's just hosting. It's saying, okay, here's the data I have. But the client doesn't care about how it's being hosted. All the client really cares, if you go to a web page, you don't really care about their underlying technology stack. Maybe you do, but I'd say the average user doesn't. So the client, just says, hey, I just, need to fulfill the requirements of the UI. Give me data to fill out the page. Server says, hey, I'm working with your API endpoints to host the data you're sending me through your relational database. Relational, but in this case, non-relational database is Mongo. Your API just says, okay, through something like Express.js, I've configured the routing in such a way to comply with a RESTful like architecture, and the API endpoints are pretty intuitive, like I mentioned before. So /users will return all users, or /user/1 will return the first user. And then this HTTP request response, this is also going to be a request made in our front end framework that will later deal with the response data and then pass along this this data to the view. In our data layer persistence, as long as we are running a process of it and we have it up, we have an open connection to the DB, to the database. This is going to be this is going to be listening in our case to Mongoose and Mongo, issuing queries to it. So for example, say we want to save a user, we might have a user model. So we'll say var user equals new user, and this user is hopefully already been modeled as a table in our database. So we could say user.name equals Theo, and then we'll do like user.age equals 23, and then using our express configuration and handling errors, we would say user.save function error user, and then if there's an error, we'll respond, we'll say response.json error. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to save it to the database. So we would just say response.json user, and later we could pass this on, as long as, say this is going to be, maybe this is like a route of users save, and then it has an ID. Maybe not an ID, it's just user save at this point, so as long as we've configured our endpoints to listen to this on the client side, so it interacts with the server side code, then we can actually see this response.json, returning us the correct data. And yeah, so that's a quick example. But yeah, this is basically the whole idea of the software development lifecycle and how everything's put together. It's really simple. I'm not saying it's the best, but you definitely hear a lot of these terms talked about a lot. And I think it's really important to to understand and get a good grasp how every piece of the stack is working together. I mean, obviously, I haven't talked about everything. We could talk about unit testing. We could talk about what technologies and tools you should use. Maybe test runners, or stuff to automate functions and um, yeah. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Um, if you have any questions, let me know. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and I hope I can make more videos like this because I thought this was kind of cool. You can sort of see my thought process behind it and sort of see how my mind's working. Again, I'm still learning. I've only been at web development for a year, and I learned through a coding boot camp. I've been working as a web developer now for a little bit over 6 months, um, and I'm pretty much full stack. I'm getting more into using backend now, but I think it's just really important to see how everything fits together, even if you're only a front end developer or a back end developer, or maybe you're just like a DBA, But I still think the more that you can sort of, wrap your head around a full stack architecture, the more value you can bring in the long run, whether it's to a company or just creating your own application. So, yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Have a great day.